Ahoy, everyone. My name is Bobby Shortle, and I'm here with Nick Rocco Scalia, and we are the Intrepid Filmographers. Every miniseries, we chart a course through the full filmography of an underdiscussed genre or journeyman filmmaker. In this expedition, we do our best to try and be explorers, using our years of film knowledge to help guide us, but always being open to discovering new things about the medium we love so much. We are currently embedded in the films of Joe Wright, and today we take a jaunt to London for his seventh film, Darkest Hour, and see if we have what it takes to be Prime Minister. Nick, how you doing tonight?
But I'm ready to weaponize the English language tonight.
Yes, a very particular accent that Gary Oldman is using in this. I guess this is a World War II set film about basically a month in Winston Churchill's life when he becomes Prime Minister and the siege of Dunkirk happens and kind of makes a decision to not broker peace with Germany and the Nazis. So
it's a good thing they've never made a movie about Dunkirk before.
It's
a good thing they didn't make one exactly the same year that this one came out, because who
it's
would
also
know
a good
anything about this?
It's also a good thing that Joe Wright's never made a movie that has anything to do with Dunkirk as well. That we discussed before. It's so fascinating. So, like I said, we're doing the films of Joe Wright. Obviously, if you've been listening along, this is his seventh film, and I was thinking about this while I was watching it, and I was like, probably before the year 2017, maybe a little, but probably before 2017, maybe a little before that, I knew nothing about the Battle of Dunkirk. I knew nothing about it at all. And now I'm like, there are so many movies that deal with it. It's kind of crazy. And, now I feel like I'm an expert on it because.
Well, I guess I knew more because I'm right there with you. And I've never really been, I like World War II movies, but I've never really been a historical scholar or anything like that. But I had seen Dunkirk and Atonement before, as you just kind of alluded to, and I don't even think I knew that's what that was. Right?
Me neither.
That was where that character was stranded on a beach, and I was like, yeah, I think that was a real thing that happened, and it kind of grounded that movie in the reality of that situation. But yeah, it wasn't until years later in 2017 when we saw Nolan's movie, and I didn't see this one in 17. I actually didn't know that's what this was about. I thought it was more of a sort of, I knew it was about Churchill, but I thought it was going to be kind of a larger span of time. But it is a pretty limited view of him, like right when he becomes Prime Minister and when he deals with that situation, which is, I mean, it's a biopic the way I like biopics. And you and I have talked about this before, where rather than try to cover the breadth of an entire human life in 1 2-hour movie, they're covering just one very representative, significant period in the chronicles of Winston Churchill. I am so sorry. I can't think of Winston Churchill anymore. I can't, going into this movie, this was banging around in my head the entire time. There is a Family Guy gag from years ago where Peter Griffin is on an airplane. I don't remember. I was going to look at it. I was going to find it on YouTube before we watched this. But it's like he gets up in front of the cabin, like there's all these people sitting around, and he's like, I'm going to do my one-act play about Winston Churchill. Peter Griffin gets up and he's like, I'm Winston Churchill. I can't not hear that anytime I think of this historical figure. So although, this is a notable performance, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it a lot.
Oh, yes, I'm sure.
The entire time. I'm just expecting Gary Oldman to break out in, I'm Winston Churchill.
Well, I had this moment at the very beginning of the movie where I was like...
You didn't know you were dealing with an 11-year-old here. But...
Well, no, I was like, I also hate Family Guy, so I'm just brushing right by it.
Can't even talk about it. Fair enough.
I was watching the beginning of this movie, and I was like, I think I've seen the beginning of this movie. And then I realized I have not seen the beginning of the movie. I've seen the episodes... of
the Third Reich propaganda films that open this movie.
In The Crown, John Lithgow plays Winston Churchill, and it's a very similar beginning where I think he's in a tub in that and not in a bed yelling at people, but in his, he's like...
Lying down and yelling at people seems to be a real Winston Churchill thing.
Double-spaced!
I mean, I like the precision of that, but I actually don't agree with that at all. I'm a single-space guy myself. Okay. I'm a little bit of a stickler for stuff like that, and...
But are you an orator, Nick? Are you're reading this in front of the whole entire country?
I mean, you've heard me talk on this show every week. Clearly, I am not. He's definitely got me beat in that department.
Yeah, and the things, there are, what you were talking before, I prefer this greatly to a cradle to the grave biopic. I think those often can be, although have high points and often have interesting or good performances and, are cool and matters, are always a little too self-referential to themselves, a little bit too cutesy to themselves, and just too episodic to really zero down, I think, what makes a person, rather, you don't have to see every event in their life to understand like why they are a certain way or how they behave a certain way. And especially for a movie, I feel like we are accustomed in watching movies to meeting somebody at a certain point in their life, them going through something big and us learning about them that way. And I think sometimes biopics get into this place where they feel like they have to be like a novel, right? Where they have to like give you every single moment, or, you got to see the first time Johnny Cash picks up a guitar. It's like, I mean, I'm.
You've got to see him with the Shoeshine Boy and then see him write the song about that.
Yeah.
Immediately, like, he just goes home and writes it.
And I'm referencing a biopic that I like generally, right there.
I like it too. Yeah.
That's one of the ones I actually like a good amount. But, I think there was a Patton Oswalt bit where he talks about how, like, they always have the scene where Paul McCartney's like looking in the window being like, will I ever get to play that guitar? Like that whole thing.
You're gonna say he was gonna see a blackbird singing in the dead of night.
No. You're like, I bet he's gonna get that guitar. That's kind of like the deal with it. So and I feel like this doesn't need to do that, right? Because everything he's doing is in the public life and public view. So you don't need to have these like cutesy little like, oh, this is why he said that, or this is how he did that, right? Because everything that he did is so public and so known that you don't have to be cutesy about it, right? You can just do it.
And a really big part of this movie, and is my favorite thing in the movie, is the speeches, right? These broadcasts that he did at this point in his life, when he's deciding essentially where England is going to stand in World War II. That stuff's great, and it exists, right? Like, so I have my issues with this script, but like these very big, powerful moments where he delivers these orations, on radio and stuff, that's all here. Like I think it was a very smart choice to focus on that so that those could be the big moments in this movie, and they are, they are stirring speeches delivered in a very stirring way in this. Yes. I think it's real. It's a highlight of this.
Yeah. So a little background on the movie. It was a script by Anthony McCartan, who is a kind of biopic specialist, I would say. Theory of Everything is one of the other big ones. And I was looking at Filmography earlier today, and there was other ones that I was like, oh, he did this one. And I was like, it made me honestly appreciate Joe Wright's direction even more, but we'll get into that as we go along. Joe Wright comes on. So the script is basically, bought in 2015 by Working Title. Joe Wright's brought on in 2016 to do it. And Gary Oldman is announced not long after Joe Wright is announced as Churchill himself. Stephen Delane is cast in November 2016, and Ben Mendelsohn and Kristen Scott Thomas are also part of the project by then. John Hurt is originally supposed to play Neville Chamberlain, has to drop out because this is the point where he's very, very sick and really can't do anything anymore, which is really interesting because when I first saw Ronald Pickup, who is the actor who plays him in the movie, I was like, I literally said to myself, I was like, is that John Hurt? There was he has a very John Hurt-ness to him.
I wouldn't have thought that until I read that after I saw the film, but I can sort of see that.
There's a lengthy rehearsal process for the film, and one of the big things, right, is that Oldman, he makes this claim that he got Kazuhiro to come out of retirement to do the makeup for this movie, which Kazuhiro won an Academy Award, and then would win an Academy Award a couple of years later as well for doing stuff on the nose on Bombshell, basically. But then he lost doing the nose on Maestro. But he's been nominated for five Academy Awards.
Nose on Bombshell? Who had a prosthetic nose in that movie?
Nicole. Is it Nicole Kidman again? Because they make her look like, what's her name? Megyn Kelly or whatever. It's either Theron or Kidman. I don't remember which one it is. But they got makeup going on and prosthetics going on in that one. But
so he came out of retirement for this and then stayed unretired.
Basically, yeah. He does a movie every couple of years now. Again, Maestro is he did this in 2018. And then Bombshell in 2017, and then 2019 for Bombshell, and then 2023 for Maestro. Whatever.
Very interesting to me. Gary Oldman specified right from the get-go that I am not going to gain weight. Like Gary Oldman, when I think of Gary Oldman, I think of like he's Gary Oldman, right? Yeah. Like very kind of gruff, but rugged, sort of handsome, skinny, fit sort of guy. And Churchill was none of those things.
Yeah.
And so usually when an actor really immerses themselves in a role, particularly for a biopic, something like this, they're willing to put on a ton of weight and make themselves, do what they can on their end to look like that character. And he kind of said right away, no, I want to do this. Like usually they say, I don't want to be covered in makeup to do this role. And he kind of said the opposite. Like, I'm going to get the best makeup person I can think of, and I'm going to have him basically handle the entirety of making me look, I mean, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Likeness of Churchill, I think.
Yeah, great likeness. To the point where you would...
And he looks nothing like Gary Oldman.
No, where you would believe, except for like right in the eyes. You can definitely see that right in his eyes, but otherwise, no. And I think it's one of those things where the makeup is fantastic, right? It doesn't look like makeup. I would believe this was a person's real face.
He
if you
looks
told
like
me
a person. Yeah, I was going to say that. You can't see the lines there. You can't see the gaps.
Yeah. There's like freckles like on his chin. I noticed that stuff. Like that's not detail that you usually get in prosthetic makeup like that, right? So really, really good makeup. It's the reason why it won the Academy Award. And Kazuhiro, really, just so people know his other credits, what he did like previous, like throughout his career. He's been going since the late 80s, but he was one of the effects artists and sculptors on the Men in Black movies, the Nutty Professor movies, Planet of the Apes.
I did not know he worked on the Nutty Professor movies.
Yeah.
Say what you will about those movies. That's a hell of a makeup.
That's a hell of a makeup job. I'm like, who cares?
They really clumped up Eddie Murphy.
Yeah, he just does the makeup, so we don't care about the quality of the film.
No, I'm just saying, like, those are worth seeing just for his work, I think.
Yeah, and the first one is very funny. It's a very funny family movie. How the Grinch Stole Christmas, he did that makeup, the Jim Carrey movie, Planet of the Apes, Haunted Mansion, Hellboy, he does Click and Norbit. He's the Curious Case of Benjamin Button makeup artist. Tron Legacy makeup artist, to bring it back again to something we've done. Looper, he did the Joseph Gordon-Levitt like nose stuff or whatever on Looper to try to sell the young Bruce Willis connection on that movie. Vaunted, famous, obviously excellent makeup artist that came out of retirement to make this, because he hadn't done a movie in like 10 years or something like that before. I'm pretty sure before he did this.
And it's a very particular brand. I mean, I know he's done the other thing as well, right? But when you think of movie makeup artists like that, you're not necessarily thinking of people who make people look like other people. You're thinking of people who make people look like, fantasy creatures,
of course,
things like that. And he seems to have a specialty in old age makeup or young age makeup, or like with Looper, just kind of making an actor look a little more like another actor.
Mm-hmm.
So I do, I think it was a good choice on Gary Oldman's part.
Yeah.
One of many.
Yes, one of many. Yes, and Anthony McCartan. So he has done The Theory of Everything, Darkest Hour, Bohemian Rhapsody, The Two Popes, and Whitney Houston, I Want to Dance with Somebody. So this is what he does. He does biopics of famous people. That's basically all he does. And I'm sure that's his niche, because this one was very successful, and so is The Theory of Everything. So if you're going to do them, you get this guy to do it, because why not? But you brought up the Gary Oldman like non-methody thing, right? And I think the big divide between someone like Gary Oldman and a lot of the people who normally do stuff like that is Gary Oldman is a British trained theater actor, and classically trained actors often do not cotton to any of that like method bullshit, right? I mean, there's that famous, right, was it Marathon Man with Olivier and
Dustin Hoffman. Yeah, what a great movie.
And Hoffman's doing all his shit or whatever to get into it. And there's this famous quote. Olivier says to him, "My boy, have you ever tried just acting?"
I have heard that story.
There's a very big divide,
that movie.
Right? Yes, absolutely. Obviously, Hoffman is a fantastic, wonderful, has given some of the best performances in at least modern cinema history, right? But there's a divide, right, between these two type of actors, this more methody, many times American actor, and the kind of classically trained British actor. And of course, there's some overlap. Someone like Daniel Day-Lewis or Christian Bale, they will often, very much physically change themselves in ways. Less Lewis. Lewis doesn't really change himself physically as much as just, is apparently like psychotic and stays in character all the time. But, Bale is famous for this stuff, right? Is gaining a ton of weight, losing a ton of weight, bulking up, whatever, all this stuff. And that's a very, I think, not classically trained sort of method to get into these kind of things, right? And I think that's probably the reason why. It's so funny because Gary Oldman now, in Slow Horses, he's, fat in real life, and just like...
I still have to see that show.
And like, it's so funny because he's really, really sort of like zeroed in on this, like, kind of drunk, kind of mean, but also funny and like interesting sort of malcontent guy, like space. This and Mank are like basically like cousins, you know, the performances in many, many ways. And Slow Horses is also in that bank of things. He's really kind of found this sort of lane for himself at this point. I think what you're absolutely right is way different than the 90s sort of nervy live wire guy that he was.
And I like it. He's one of my favorite actors and kind of always has been. And even back then, I mean, I love, he's in True Romance for what, a minute or so. It's one scene. It is one of my favorite characters. It's one of my favorite like one scene characters of all time. And he's just so fun in that movie. I actually finally just saw an early 90s movie he made, a noir film called Romeo is Bleeding.
Yes, of course.
You've seen it?
Yeah, long time ago though. Long time ago.
Yeah, I had always, it's been on my list for like 30 years or something. You know, I was into those movies when I was a kid too. And just having seen that recently, and then the next time I saw him was in this, the change is pretty incredible. But yeah, he did. It was a different kind of energy. He was, you know, a very Gen X-y kind of actor. You know, it was there's a little bit of nihilism and a little bit of dangerousness in those roles. And, you know, he gets his start basically playing Sid Vicious in Sid and Nancy. And I was thinking about that watching this too, right? Like you start your career playing this kind of character, you know, two very famous figures in British history.
Yeah.
Maybe Sid Vicious a little bit less than Winston Churchill, but you know, two notable Brits, and you know, you start your career there, and then you know, the role of a lifetime is such a different thing from that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, I always think of him right in The Professional, right? A totally unproblematic movie made by a totally chill, normal guy.
But man, what a villain performance!
What a villain performance!
A villain for the ages in that.
Everyone, you know, everyone scream has just like always been embedded in my brain, right? That's how I always thought of him. Obviously, he's been in a ton of Nolan stuff, right? He shows up in a lot of those movies, and he's great in all of them. He's like unrecognizable as Truman.
The best Commissioner Gordon they've ever had. I think he is.
I think for sure. Yes, absolutely. You know, he's Truman in Oppenheimer in like a one scene performance, you know, very much channeling.
Forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Channeling this, I think a little bit of this Winston Churchill energy in that one. But yeah, obviously one of, I think, the most decorated and popular actor of his type, right? Probably in history, or at least in modern history, right? He's one of those guys who has never really been the number one guy in any sort of like giant, you know, huge movie, but he's in so many movies that people have seen so many times, and he fits that perfect bill of, he's just almost much like a lot of these classically trained British actors. He's just always good in the thing that he's in.
He does. Yeah. He elevates everything that he's in. I mean, his choices have not always been the best choices.
No, for sure not.
You know, a movie like Air Force One is a pretty lame movie in a lot of ways, but like, again, it's Gary Oldman in this villain role. And that's what I remember about that movie, is just him doing the Gary Oldman thing, you know, the late 90s Gary Oldman thing.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, even when he makes something that's basically a glorified B movie like that, he kind of takes it to a level that it wouldn't have been if you just cast your average generic villain guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that was right. What you're saying is, you mentioned the word villain. That was his thing for a long time. You needed a good villain, bring him on.
He does sleazy incredibly well. Like Romeo's Bleeding is a very, very sleazy movie, and he embodies it. I mean, he's the protagonist of that, but still kind of a dirtbag, and no one does it like Gary Oldman.
Yeah. A movie he's great in that it's actually a movie in general doesn't get talked about a lot. And I don't know if the movie itself is fantastic, but so many great performances. That movie, The Contender, with Jeff Bridges, and is that
the Joan Allen?
Joan Allen, yes.
Yeah. He was in that. Yeah, I like that movie.
Just one of those
since it came out, but
one of those movies where it's just, you know, people sitting in a room yelling at each other, and I just love it. You know?
Oscar Beatty movie, yeah.
Yeah, it was. And
this one is too.
Bridges and Joan Allen, I think, both got nominated for that movie. He shows up like, you know, he's Mason Verger in Hannibal.
What a fun performance that is.
Very performance in a interminably long movie.
I like that movie. I like that movie a lot.
But you know, he just is. And then I think really honestly what turns sort of the Gary Oldman thing around in a lot of ways is a two-pronged thing. It's playing Sirius Black in the Harry Potter movies, and it's obviously playing Commissioner Gordon in the Batman movies, right? That I think recontextualizes his thing a little bit for people, where he's not just automatically the villain in something anymore, right? He will still play villains, at times, but this leads to, I think, a transition into taking more, I wouldn't call them hero roles, but being the protagonist in some movies, like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is a great movie.
Really good movie, yeah.
Stuff like that.
He's
stuff
doing
like this, obviously.
Elder statesman thing now.
Yes.
It's as a classically trained British actor, you were saying before. That's what you do. That's the Harry Potter movies, many of which I haven't seen, were kind of famous for that, right? Like taking these people that are at that stage. He's a little younger than a lot of them, but
yes, yeah.
These sort of older, very trained thespian sort of actors and giving them their franchise, which they all kind of deserved it at that point.
And you hear stories about it,
and they really good pay.
They were good paychecks, and you hear stories about it, and they're just like Jason. I heard some interview with Jason Isaacs, and they asked him about it, and he was like, "You have no idea, man. It was the greatest thing ever. Like, we would go there, and we would be in like the pressure was never on us for the most part because we were just in one or two scenes.
Right, the pressure's on all those little kids.
Yeah, he's like, but then you get to go hang out like in a tent with like Maggie Smith and Michael Gambon and all of these like amazing actors who he's like, I've either worked with or looked up to my whole life. And we just get to sit there and like drink tea and gossip for hours, and then we go out and shoot our scenes and then we come back, he's like, it was always great. And you'd come back it was nice. Every year it was kind of like you were going back to school for a little while, and you get to spend time with these people. Yeah. So those movies are famous for that, obviously. And then he's kind of
villain actor, Jason Isaacs.
Oh my God, what a villain actor. What an amazing villain actor. Again, it comes from that same school, right? Of just like, yeah, I'm going to be in bad movies because I think of acting as a job and I'm going to take the jobs that come my way, but I'm not going to, I don't have phone it in my vocabulary as an actor, right? I do the work. I do my scene work the same way I do it for anything else, and I just show up and do it. You know what I mean? And whether it's one of your best performances or not, it always ranges, but you have a floor of quality that you're getting when you have some of these guys, come in and guys and gals come in and do your stuff, And, Oldman, right, was one of those guys who started to become one of the guys where it's like, well, when is he going to win an Oscar? Because he's been doing this since the early 80s. He's had little brushes with the possibility of winning, but he's becoming one of those guys where it's like, okay, who's going to give him the role, right? To make it undeniable for the Academy to give him a Best Actor Oscar, right?
Right, because you never get Best Actor for playing a villain. And
no,
he's done so much of that.
No. Best Supporting is a possible if you're in a very special, big villain.
He was nominated for a couple of things, I think. Like that wasn't his first. This wasn't his first brush.
No, I don't think it was his first. I'm going to look right now.
I should have looked at that too.
Should have been in the dossier. List of nominations and awards received by Gary Oldman. Here we go. He's been nominated 3 times. Yeah, he was nominated for but the only time before this, in the 2018, the ceremony that took place in 2018. I hate the way that they list these things out. Yeah. It's the 2017 movies that he wins for. Darkest Hour. 6 years earlier in 2011, he was nominated for Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. That was his first ever nomination. And then he's nominated again in 2021 for Mank, and he loses in 2021.
Actor for Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy?
Yes.
Because it's been a while. I love that movie, but I haven't seen it. He is the lead. It's a nice ensemble
cast. He's the full-on lead. But he's the lead. He's like, there's no way. He's nominated for some BAFTAs, obviously, more BAFTAs. He's won more BAFTAs. He Prick Up Your Ears. He was nominated for Best Actor in a Leading Role. Nil by Mouth. He was nominated for and won.
That is a movie that, again, much like Romeo's Bleeding. Have you seen Nil by Mouth?
No, I've never seen
his movie.
Yeah, it's his movie. He wrote and directed it.
Starring him.
Yeah, he didn't win Best Actor for it. Sorry. He won for the film and for the screenplay. He didn't win for actor for that.
I think that needs to be like on my immediate must-see list after Darkest Hour.
He gets nominated for Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Doesn't win. He wins for Darkest Hour. And then he's been nominated for some Emmys, some Golden Globes, obviously, but not really that much. Really, it is Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is kind of the beginning of like the time where he starts to get noticed by the Academy, right? Stuff like The Contender, he was nominated for like a Screen Actors Guild Award or a Golden Globe, but nothing in the Academy Awards until then. So, which it becomes another thing where it's like, again, he plays in genre movies, he plays villains a lot of the time, so those kind of performances often get ignored, right? And we're talking about awards stuff. So when it comes to something like this, you can definitely, and I remember this narrative even at the time, right, being like, okay, he's just going for it now. Like this is what he wants it, and this is definitely just like that. Like, all right, give me my Oscar, movie, right? Which I think, especially when you're in sort of the season of when a movie like this comes out, that kind of thing can turn some people on, but it also turns a lot of people off to your movie. Where there's a certain section of film fan, and I think you and I probably fall into this, where you're like, I don't want to see the intent behind the curtain.
Sure. You can kind of see the wheels turning a little bit too much there. Sure. And I think that's what kept me away from this one.
Me too. Absolutely.
I like these kinds of movies, and having seen Dunkirk that year, I'd be interested to learn a little bit more about that. And there's a review, I forgot who wrote it. It was one of the positive reviews of this, because they were not all positive.
No,
there were some pretty negative ones, pretty nasty ones, and a lot of the nasty ones were about what you were just saying, right? Where this movie was so self-consciously an Oscar bait movie, and particularly this is like, I forget who it was. I think it was one of the very, very sort of poor reviews.
Yeah, the one you put in the overview, that was a nasty review.
That was bad. I think that guy just really hated Churchill. But there was one, it was just above that in Metacritic, and it was basically like, who is this movie for other than Gary Oldman, right? Mm-hmm. Like, why make this movie? It felt like a very crass to this critic, like, here is a chance for Gary Oldman to get an Oscar, and that's really the only reason this movie has for existing. I disagree with that, of course. You do too, but you can sort of see it, and I think it hangs over the movie, I think, in a negative way a little bit.
I mean, this is what I think. I think that so much of that, though, falls into this category of criticism, I guess, I would say.
That's true, too.
That I bristle against sometimes, which is like, you're bringing so much meta context into this review you're writing, or into your feelings about the movie, that isn't, you're kind of ignoring what the movie is, right? And there are plenty of movies, right, that speaking of like a movie like The Theory of Everything, or a movie like The Imitation Game, movies that came out right around this area, which I think are feel way more like what that review is talking about than
both of which got name checked in reviews of this all over the place.
I'm
Good
sure
ones, bad ones, those came up a lot.
Yeah,
particularly Theory of Everything from the same writer, but definitely Imitation Game came up too.
And I think, like, but even in those cases, I think if you're writing critically about a movie in, like, for a publication or whatever, to me, like, that's a footnote in your review. That isn't the meat of your review, right? If you're writing like a pithy review on Letterboxd, do whatever you want, right? But like, if you're getting paid to do this, you are not instructing someone who is reading your review whether or not they should see the movie or not, because what you're telling them is, I have a bias against this type of movie and I didn't like it, and only people who can go like, well, I have the opposite bias, so maybe I would like this movie, but that's not an instructive review, right? And I think, like, there's stuff to criticize this movie about that's not some sort of like feeling that it was a cynical enterprise, right? So there's that part of it. But getting into the movie, my overall thoughts, I think Joe Wright explicitly, and Oldman, obviously, the performances are part of this, but the performances in Joe Wright elevate this thing to me over that typical sort of boring, sort of stodgy Oscar biopic sort of vibe. I think this movie,
drama also. I mean, this is
chamber. Yes, it's just people in rooms. It's just people in rooms.
Yep.
And sometimes very small, very poorly like lit, very rooms.
There's a very interesting sense of place in this movie.
Yes, absolutely.
And in a lot of those rooms, like we kind of feel like we live in those rooms. For the vast majority of the running time here.
But I think this movie was highly, highly entertaining from the beginning, basically till the end. Like, I was like, movie was flying for me when I was watching it. I was like, it was just rolling past. It was the opposite of when we were watching Pan the last time, where I was like, oh my God, how much longer do we have in this movie? This thing was cooking for me.
And significantly shorter than this, I think, like 15 minutes shorter.
It is 15 minutes shorter, yeah. And so I really, really liked it. I think, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts and your criticisms of the script, because I think I probably will share some of those things. But what this thing has going for it for me, which always can push me over the finish line as long as the structure is relatively sound, is a bunch of just one, obviously, unbelievable lead performance, but also a bunch of just good performances, all just cooking together, right? People just acting their asses off in a room, saying a bunch of stuff to one another. Like that. I love that shit. And I think this movie does that really, really well. So, I liked it more than I expected to, and I think it's obviously, I think it's in the better half of his, filmography. So that's my thoughts about it, my general thoughts.
Okay. Are we doing that? Are we laying the cards?
Give me the general
there?
thoughts. Yeah.
I think this performance is absolutely incredible. It is what got me through the movie. I liked there's a lot of things the story is very interesting. There's a lot of things about it that are, that are kind of my jam, that are kind of just right in my wheelhouse. I do like to see the kind of behind the scenes approach to, familiar historical events and things like that. So I had no fault of Gary Oldman whatsoever. I do think the script in this, there's some very, as much as it's not one of those biopics, like, the scene that I always go back to, and again, I like the movie too, Walk the Line, the Shoeshine Boy scene.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's some Shoeshine Boy moments in this, and particularly toward the end, there's some real, this is a scene that we need so you can know what Churchill is thinking in this moment that kind of sets things up in the plot. And it felt a little creaky to me. It felt a little obvious. What I really didn't like in this movie was Joe Wright's direction, actually.
Really?
You think he elevated the material?
I do.
This is the movie where I feel like maybe it's because I'm seeing it after seeing so many Joe Wright films. I'm getting a little sick of his style. I'm getting a little sick of what he does. And that might just be Joe Wright overload. This is as far as we've gone. This is the longest filmography we've dealt with thus far. But I did a whole podcast on John Carpenter. We watched all of his movies. And by the end, I couldn't wait. He made some terrible movies toward the end, John Carpenter. But there's some real John Carpenter moments in Ghosts of Mars and The Ward, which I actually think is a pretty good movie, and I was excited about those. I was like, oh yeah, there's my Johnny boys back. In this one, the Joe Wrightness of it is what really kind of worked against it for me. The camera work in this, the way he's just always, there's this moment where Churchill's just in his office or something, or in his home office, and there's this dolly shot where the glasses are perfectly positioned on the desk, and there's all of this stuff, and we kind of go by, and what we want to focus on here is Gary Oldman thinking, because he just looks interesting when he's thinking. And it's no, this all has to be perfectly lit, and this very sort of precise, very stodgy, you mentioned it's not a stodgy movie. I think it is. I feel Joe Wright is trying to, it almost feels like a parody of an atonement type movie. And I don't know, this is the one that made me kind of recontextualize Joe Wright kind of altogether, because this criticism has been lodged at him, way earlier than this by other people.
Yeah.
And I disagreed with it up until this point. I think Atonement is a great movie, and I really, really liked Anna Karenina, what we talked about a couple weeks ago. But I don't know. I think it's just, I'm seeing a little too much, you could do this, and I think there's a more powerful movie if you just let it breathe and let us focus a little more on this performance at the center of it. And some of these shots are just the opening moment, right? The argument at the beginning of this, and with the camera kind of comes down, swoops down. It's this crane shot, and I don't know anything about British government. What are we in there? The House of Lords?
I think we're in the yeah, I think so. We're in Parliament for sure, but
there's a lot of finely dressed, handsomely mounted production again. I don't know exactly.
I think it's Parliament. I think it's Parliament.
Whatever it is, the way those shots work, I don't know. I want a little more simplicity here, and he just refuses. It's almost like he's defiantly nope, I am going to do some swooping, extravagant camera movement here, whether we need it or not. And I really started to tire of that. And I don't know if it was just, again, because we've seen so many Joe Wright movies in a row, or that this one just kind of takes it too far when it doesn't need to. But and I don't, if I had to give this a rating, it would be a 3-star movie out of 4. I liked it a lot. I did find it entertaining. I thought the pacing of this was great. I love the way it kind of chronicled the time period, the very short time period that it's in. Those on-screen titles.
Big text. We love big text.
I love big text. Yeah. The date in May.
Yeah.
Loved that. And that is a stylistic thing, but that didn't bother me. But there was other stuff that just, not that it was terrible, not that it was ugly. Some of them were ugly. The shot of when they're in Calais, when that gets bombed, and we see the soldiers on the ground, and the camera travels up into the sky, and then we see the bomber planes, and these CGI bombs drop.
Yeah, but I feel
we
that's
drop
just
back down with them.
we don't got a budget for I don't know even why they did that shot, to be honest with you, because like
I don't know why
it's not a war movie, you
right.
know?
Right. And I kind of would have liked this to just be the chamber drama that it is. Like I think
the intent of that, right, is to deliver you like the actual human toll, right, of these are real people, so take us out of these rooms with these, you know, rich white politicians and put us into like the shit for a second. But I don't think it's necessary either, but I'm saying right, I think that's the reasoning behind doing it. The stuff
in those rooms is so good, you know, when it's Churchill arguing with Chamberlain in Halifax, like I feel it, you know,
yeah, I agree.
I think the movie is very fair in this, you know, treating both sides of this conflict and letting these characters kind of express what's going on.
And by both sides, you mean the peace-seeking side and right, the pacifist side, not the Nazis and the English.
No. We don't really. I mean,
no, we don't.
Jokingly, I mentioned. I mean, this opens on some propaganda footage, but other than that, I don't think we ever see the other side of the conflict.
No, he's in a newspaper.
You know, this is about the war in British government rather than, you know, the war. So yeah, I don't know. I am maybe I'm being overly critical because no one else who said, like, we're probably the first ones who have watched this as part of a, you know, let's watch all of Joe Wright's movies. I got to imagine that's true. So that might be affecting my feelings about this, but it took me a little out of it.
You know, I think. Well, obviously, we know the first 50 minutes of Pan is your favorite movie of all time, so you're not that tired of him yet. But I think that
I stand by my feelings about the first 15 minutes of Pan. Smells Like Teen Spirit is minute 16. That's my argument. Yeah, but you can draw a line right there.
So it's so funny because I feel like we're flipping a little bit here because I was very hard on him in the Atonement conversation about for this.
Yeah.
And I actually feel like there are flourishes, right? There are flourish shots, and there are certain things that are, I think, very filmmakery in here. But for the most part, I think this is probably his most chilled back stylistic movie. You know, there is a lot of just like, you know, let's put the camera down and let these people talk stuff. But I feel like without those flourishes you're talking about, I wouldn't have had the propulsivity that I felt through the movie, right? I think that those things add to and spice up these scenes we've seen a million times in a million of these movies, right? We've seen a million movies where it's like some fucking boring ass workman-like director who's just like, I'm going to put the cameras down, chap, and you guys just do your thing, right? And let's just capture the performances. And you can get good performances out of that, but I think a lot of those movies are tough to get through, right? And this thing has sort of like that Joe Wright montage expertise that I think we've seen throughout some of these movies, even the movies we haven't liked. He's very good at like intercutting two things together to make each one of them a little bit more interesting than the other. Like the first speech that Churchill gives to Parliament, you know, when he's reciting it to Parliament, we get this intercut right between when he's writing it and when he's speaking it.
I did like that a lot.
Yeah. And I thought that was a really well-constructed scene, right? Because it informs you about Churchill's public personality and his private personality and how they are different and how they are the same. And also this idea of him as this magic wordsmith, you see the work that gets put into making those speeches, right? And I like that a lot because I think too many times movies like this can fall into like the great man problem, which is like, this guy's just so preternaturally good at this thing, right? And, you know, and this movie does fall into those traps a few times, I will say, but I think it does a decent job at balancing that out with showing you the uglier sides of his personality or the foibles or problems that he has, right?
A lot of self-doubt too.
Yes.
I mean, he is not, I like that he is not this confident figure that I thought he was going to be. And I think Gary Oldman, really, really gets that across nicely also.
I also do love whenever we see a little peek, it's only in movies or TV shows, into the British parliamentary system, which is always just a bunch of English people screaming at each other and waving handkerchiefs and yelling. And I like that stuff. But we're in the part of the war where Neville Chamberlain has kind of let Hitler kind of run roughshod in Europe, right? We've gone through the concession sort of part of this conflict where they're kind of, if we give him this, he'll just stop, and he's not stopping, right? And we've gotten we are at the point where he has lost the faith of, you know, the other party and also members of his party and also the public. So they need to find somebody new. Churchill is a flip flopper. Basically, he was a liberal, then he was a conservative, then he was a liberal, whatever. And so the other side kind of likes him, so they will support him as prime minister, and they will form one like super government, basically. Because if people don't know how it works in parliamentary systems, it's very different than in the United States. You have to have a certain amount of there's more than one party. There's more than two parties. Sorry. So you have to be able to come to a consensus with like multiple different groups to form a majority government, basically. Basically, you get elected, but then you have to basically form a government once you're elected in order to...
With your rivals.
With your rivals in order to do something, right? And the kind of deal is get Chamberlain out of there, and if you bring in Churchill, we won't be two separate coalitions. We will all come together and be one government, one super government, and we will get things going, and it'll be smoother and whatever. Churchill's own party doesn't want this because they don't like him, because he is a flip-flopper, because he talks out his ass a lot, because he made some mistakes in his
and the other party underestimates him, right? Like, part of the reason why they want him in there is because they think he's going to be, he's got a war record that is not sterling.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that's a very British way of describing that, isn't it? So I think because he is fallible, and because they know that the people can turn on him easily, they'll think he's kind of a safe choice.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, which I think is another thing that I didn't really know about, that I learned from this movie. So
yeah,
certainly there is. I mean, I don't know if I could do a book report, or a historical essay or anything just based on this, but it does have a pretty definitive perspective. It's fair to both sides of the conflict that we see, but it certainly comes down on the side of Churchill.
It does. I mean, it does paint. I will say, it does paint. What's his name? The war minister. What's his actual character's name? Viscount Halifax.
Stephen Delane's
character as sort of the villain of the movie.
He's the villain of the movie.
He's I will get him to agree to peace. And it's like,
yeah, bow before my receding hairline.
Yeah, exactly. And my calls for you to talk to someone. They try to make him a little bit more, sort of, I think, nefarious than he really is,
Yeah.
And I do wish that's one of the things that is a slight failing of the movie is like,
I did have to look that guy up. Yeah. Like, was the real person this much of a bastard? Because he kind of is.
His perspective is sort of, and obviously we have the burden of the knowledge, right? Of like the Churchill was right. Right. So it's like, he's right. So there's part of a thing where, you get some of that out of it. So you need somebody who's really getting the audience's goat, so they kind of can forget, that what this is a historical record of something that's already happened. And so you can kind of get, wrapped up in the machinations of it. And I'm sure like people from across the pond are like, you guys are idiots. Like, we know this stuff like the back of our hand,
right.
But we're just dumb Americans who don't learn about this stuff. I never even heard about Dunkirk in school when we were learning about World War II.
No.
So, so like, that's what I'm saying. Like, basically when you learn World War II in America.
Your understanding of the story, right? Like, all we know is that Neville Chamberlain appeased Hitler and Churchill fought Hitler. And
that's all we know.
It's totally black and white. There's no nuance there whatsoever. Maybe that is in some way true, but it definitely doesn't give you the full picture of the story. So I do
of course
think, not. And it's interesting, right? Because this whole movie it's really this three-way conflict. It's really 2-on-1, right? It's Chamberlain and Halifax kind of taking the reins, and really, Chamberlain almost becomes kind of Halifax's like lackey, like his number two. And, he's this old guy who like, I'll do all the work and you just have to back me here. Versus Churchill, who is kind of his own.
Because they want him to be the prime minister, Halifax, first, and he's like, it's not my time, or whatever. Right. Because I think he wants to discredit Chamberlain so that he can take over, unopposed, basically. And so we get, this scene where because the prime minister has to go and accept the job. Churchill has to go accept the job from the king, right? And we're entering with another movie, which is the King's Speech, right, where we have the stuttering king here, this time played by Ben Mendelsohn.
We haven't mentioned Ben Mendelsohn,
who I think is great in this.
Another one of my favorite actors. Who I love him in everything that he's in. He's another one who often plays villains and always elevates stuff.
Yes,
that he's in. I saw him for the first time. You ever see the show? Oh, what the hell is it even called? It's set in the Florida Keys. It's a Netflix show with Linda Cardellini.
You talking about
terrific first season, then went to Bloodline. Went to shit real bad in season 2.
It's Kyle Chandler, right?
Kyle Chandler and Linda Cardellini and Ben Mendelsohn, who I'd never seen before or never noticed him before, and he plays the villain in the first scene of that. He's a brother in this family, and it was like that was one of those performances where I was like, who is this guy? I want to see everything that he's in. He's incredible.
Yeah.
And then, he gets the Star Wars gig. He's Oren Krennic. Which one was it? Rogue One?
Rogue One, but he's also going to be in season 2 of
yes,
Andor, which is great.
Which I've always wanted to go back and watch season 1, and now I have even more reason to.
Yeah.
But he's just a mesmerizing actor, and he, I guess, actually looked like the real King George.
He looks very handsome in this movie. I do not think of him as like a generically handsome guy. He's more of like a character actor face.
Yeah.
But his hair and everything, he looks kingly. I'll say.
Yeah, he's got a real royal aristocrat vibe about him.
Yeah.
I didn't really know that side of the story either. Like, that was really interesting.
It was, yeah.
The relationship between him and Churchill is, I think, one of the best things in the movie also.
Agreed. 100% agreed.
Between the two of them later on where I was like, this is incredible. Like, thinking back on it, right? Like, I think the Joe Wrightness of it was a problem for me, but there are some scenes that I'm never going to forget in this movie, and I would watch this again. I would recommend it to people, so I definitely didn't dislike it.
Yeah, I said to Ghost of this podcast, Brian Verderosa, that I was like, I expected it to be like boring, and it was a lot of fun. Is basically what I said to it. And I mean, a lot of that again is Oldman, right? But I went to this first scene where where Churchill goes to meet him. This is one of the right things that I really like, right? Which is that he doesn't do fancy camera stuff in this scene, but the way he blocks it, I just really like. Which is that they're both standing very separate from each other in these two windows, right? And they're sort of like these two like lit areas of the room where the rest of the room is kind of cold and dark, and there are these two like lights in the room, basically, right? And I really like, most directors who make movies like this would not stage something like that, right? They'd be sitting on a couch, they'd be, it would be a traditional, not would be badly blocked, right? But it would just be traditionally blocked, right? Where you got like they're coming and they're sitting in a stodgy room together or whatever, and and it's just a reverse shot, coverage sort of thing. And this one, I just really liked the way that, he stages it. And even the point where like, there's a little bit like similar when Churchill has to kind of like come out and take the position, right? He has to kind of step into the dark for a little bit before he kind of retreats back into the light, right? Where it's like, these two just they don't have the meeting place yet, right? They don't understand yet what their center is, right? They don't have that.
So funny in this scene too, the idea that they have to set a time to meet, and that 4 o'clock is no good. And how dare you, lunch? Why would we do lunch? All right, I guess we can do lunch. The king, literally the king of England, and Churchill's like, no, we're gonna go on my schedule here, and I'm gonna tell you when we're gonna meet. I liked that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of stuff in this movie. I'll say one of the reasons I liked it is there's a lot of little comedy of manners bits in it, right? And I think that also kind of elevates it for me beyond the normal one, because I'm gonna keep going back to this movie because I did watch it relatively recently, The Imitation Game, which I'd never seen before, and I had this thing where I was like, I'm still doing it. I'm slowly going through and trying to fill in the gaps of like the Best Picture nominees I haven't seen yet, right? And I was like, let me start with this year, and I watched that one, and that one has none of this, right? That one is all what we're talking about here, which is just like, people in very nice costumes.
Serious people
right?
talking about serious stuff in rooms.
Yes,
in very
exactly.
well-appointed rooms. Yeah.
And fine. The filmmaking is fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with it, right? It's not poorly blocked. It doesn't look bad, but it's just nothing, right? There's nothing. There's no engine in it. There's no juice to it, right? And it's too concerned with feeling serious, right? To really give you any sort of the spice of what actual life and being around people who are like this would be like, right? And it's like that movie is so caught up in how tragic the story of that guy is at the end of his life, right? That they can't even allow there to be any sort of light in any part of it, right? As if his whole life was just serious pain, and I think like this movie does a good job of being like, and it's also the guy, right? I mean, Churchill.
Right. That's the thing. Churchill is a funny guy. He does have a sense of humor, and the movie has a sense of humor. But I think it really nicely counterweights that with like the situation. Like
Mm-hmm.
literally, this movie is called Darkest Hour, and
Yeah.
it is. I mean,
Yes.
it really brings home. Even without those scenes where we actually see, the people who are directly being affected, just the situation that this country is in at this point, and how they could easily, like, they mention it a couple of times, like, we're going to lose our entire army. Like, I've never thought of that.
That's
before,
insane.
That's
an insane thing to be a real
like,
situation.
We no longer have a military because they've entirely been wiped out. Like, so it is. I mean, it's kind of apocalyptic, and we know, although it's not, we don't really see much of them in this movie. We know who the enemy is. We know what they're capable of. We know how powerful they are. I think this movie really, it's in an elliptical way, but it really shows just how bad a situation this was and how serious, because there's some guy now, he's a podcaster or something that, he's like a World War II revisionist history guy, and he kind of goes on all the political talk podcasts and, talks about this era, right? And for someone who doesn't have a sense of the gravity of this situation, you might think that, maybe this guy's right. That stuff we were taught, those very simple things we were taught about World War II, maybe they were wrong. And this movie, I think, pushes back really hard against that by showing, just how important it was that the right decision was made at this point, this very, very low point in British history where they literally could have lost everything. And I don't know that we need those scenes with the people on the street to give us that. I think the movie, just the war room, just the inner sanctum. There's this great thing that this movie does, and I don't know how true to life it is, but the secretary, Elizabeth Layton,
the Lily James character,
Lily James's character, she does more scenes with Gary Oldman than I think anybody else in the film.
Yeah,
and she's kind of the surrogate for that stuff because she is just kind of a civilian woman who she's lost her brother in the conflict and has very strong feelings about it, and is kind of his sounding board in a number of scenes. I love the stuff between the two of them because it just, the way she performs it, just in her eyes, we kind of get the bigger world, the bigger conflict that this movie is addressing.
Yeah, but I mean, I do think it's important. I think we'll talk about this as we get later in the movie, right? That I think so much of what gets lost in big decisions like this, right, is the lack of consideration for the micro and not just focusing so much on the macro, right? Or focusing on what you think people want you to do or what you think people are thinking, and so I think you need a little bit of explanation of or I guess emphasis on what the opposite thing is. And I think what you're saying too, though, about this, many of these people who believe now that like elections have no consequences and government's just like a game that we play, that like it doesn't matter who's in charge, we're all screwed anyway, whatever, all of that stuff. It can't, everyone's just, it's so, everything, people don't realize how comfortable and how safe and how easy things are now compared to the way they used to be, and so they can't picture in their brains
like the entire army being wiped out.
Exactly.
Like, you snap your fingers and your country has no way of defending itself.
Or a decision, or someone in power has to make a decision, and it can mean the life or death of hundreds of thousands of people, right? And to think about that pressure, and I think that's something that Oldman plays really, really well, right? There, that scene very late, right, where the king comes to see him, and he like, one of those I feel like it's like Joe Wright really lets all the gas off the like prettying everything up, where it's just like this harsh downlight on him, and he just looks old and tired and strung out, and like you really feel it in that moment, right? The pressure on it. You can't even imagine, right, the pressure. But it's so interesting, right? This point, like dealing with, I always find it fascinating with the king versus the government and like what it all means and like how they interact with each other, especially then where it was more of an active position, right, than it is now, right? Now it's completely ceremonial. Even then it was mostly ceremonial, but there was still a lot more of the country would look to that figure as
you
a
kind
leader.
Of pay your respects. I mean, you're making the decisions, but he's kind of approving, I guess.
Yes, he's approving, and also like the country cares about what he thinks and says and what his actions are, right? So like I said, Mendelsohn's great in this and does a great job of, they never talk about the stutter, but you can tell he's going through certain sentences, you can hear him pause and take his time and wait and all these moments. And I think it's a really nice way to say like, hey, who this guy is. Like the guy, there was a movie that came out 10 years ago where a guy won an Academy Award for playing this guy, so we're not going to do a whole big thing about how he stutters. You'll get it, And also, it's not that important that he's a stutterer, right? It's just like this guy speaks in an interesting way. And they bring up, they mention the brother having the affair or whatever, and how Churchill was like supportive of him having the affair or whatever. I gotta tell you, man, these old English bitches, like just all of them just gossiping about Winston Churchill before he comes in the room. Oh, he drinks all the time, and they're like walking through the halls of Parliament. And again,
he does drink a lot.
He does drink a lot.
And they smoked like multiple tens of thousands worth of cigars in this movie. Or Gary Oldman smoked.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Expensive...
it's method. I must smoke all these cigars and drink all this whiskey. But this is the thing where I feel like, and again, the Joe Wrightness of it really works, because this whole scene, again, could have been shot a million ways, right? But this thing is like, the camera's always active. It's always doing something. It's defining the space, which I think he's very, very good at, right? He's so good at defining the space that he's in, right? And like this idea...
war room that we spend a lot of time in this movie. It is down a tunnel in the bowels of, 10 Downing Street?
Yeah.
It's this like cinder block wall. This movie's very brown, and it's never more brown than when we're in this room where like these huge decisions are being made. And mostly, I mean, they meet in there. The war cabinet meets in there, but that is where Churchill really kind of confronts Chamberlain and Halifax.
Mm-hmm.
Those scenes, I thought those scenes were absolutely terrific. Every time we're down in that whole, we get like a tour of the building when he first goes down there.
Well, it's when Lily James first, she's our entrance in it, which is great because, like you said, she doesn't know, so it doesn't seem weird or overbearing that someone's telling her where everything is. But what I love about this, what you're saying,
being told where not to go, and Churchill's like, "No, you can come in here."
Yeah, that does happen.
Like, hey, there's no women allowed in this room, but come on in. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, he goes, "Now there is, because I'm the prime minister," basically, which I like that. But the same thing where they're both being bitchy about Churchill, right? Then this when the camera, like, it's like it starts at the top, right, and then it goes down this like, not spiral staircase, but this staircase in the middle of the building, and the camera is sort of twisting down, and then you meet Lily James down there, and then you see where the bunker is in relation to like the fancy part of the building, right? And I just really like the way he defines space. Talk about Pride and Prejudice as well, right? He's very good at being like, look, this thing, this like utilitarian, like almost brutalist, like structure is right below this like grand, gorgeous, palace almost, right? So it's really interesting connection. And like, again, to me, not something a lesser director or a less stylistic director, I should say, would try to attempt in something like this, right? And that's when I say I think his style elevates this, that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about, right? And I think also, like we said, it's just, once he gets in that bunker, the bunker's a cool set, but it's like a bunch of little rooms. And so like if it was just those, and they're in there most of the movie, most of the second half of the movie, they're just in those rooms. And I feel like it would get really boring if it was just like, okay, he walks into a room, camera. The way the camera moves, to me, gives the movie energy and propulsion.
I think that's true to some extent. I do think there's some show offy stuff here that he does. And
he's going to show off.
Almost every movie, but yeah, there's more than there needs to be. I don't mind. I love the shots of the tunnel. There's this kind of recurring thing where he's in this, however you get there, this very long, very dark, these sort of bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling. It's like he goes into this inner sanctum and stuff takes place that, like, I mean, Joe Wright has always, like you said, even since Pride and Prejudice, is very good at defining spaces and, the kind of upstairs, downstairs stuff that a lot of British fiction is all about, the class-based stuff. Yeah, I can find not much fault with that. It's just, it's some of the other stuff. It's some of the outdoor scenes and just moments where things are happening and maybe we just don't need to have so much direction, or so much set design, production design. It's all very handsomely mounted. And with this one, we've said that about every one of his movies. That's the phrase that I keep using. This is the one where I got a little tired of handsomely mounted. This is the one where I was like, okay, enough, Joe.
I mean, to be fair, the last one was not handsomely mounted at all.
Sure it was. It wasn't good, but I mean...
No, it was not handsomely mounted.
It was.
No.
The native village, Tiger Lily's
I wouldn't
village,
call it, I mean, that's interesting set. I wouldn't call it handsomely mounted. When I say handsomely mounted, I'm talking about shit like this. Like, this is the movie. This is the kind of thing. When you're doing something in the British halls of Parliament and you're hiring Joe Wright to do it, this is what it's going to look like. You know what I mean? It's like
some pretty awesome set design. That was not the problem with that movie.
The set design is fun. I'm not saying the sets are bad, but it's like there's Hensley Mountain in me is like, you know, Pride and Prejudice, Atonement, like these kind of like looks, not like ostentatious big sets. Like I wouldn't call like Hook handsomely mounted. You know what I mean? Like it's a cool looking movie, but it's not, I wouldn't call it handsomely mounted, right? And I think that, you know, for me, for the most part, the direction works for me. And there's obviously places where he does too much. He's the director who does too much. It's his biggest fault as a director, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't think we're really too far off. Like, you know, for me, you said 3 out of 4. I'm like 4 out of 5, right? On it. There are definitely problems with it, right? But I think most of the time, me as someone who is more sensitive to how he calls out so much that there is a person with a camera doing things in, you know, to the people you're seeing on screen. I did not feel that really much at all in this. My main problems were, like we said, with like scripting more than anything else, and just like structurally some of the stuff. It was more structure than like any lines or scene to scene kind of stuff, really.
I agree with that.
I think the dialogue is pretty sharp for the most part, and again, some of that is because you just got great actors, you know, doing it. But I even think like some of the scenes
they're all British, so it all sounds classier than it actually is, probably.
Yeah. I mean, like, you know, that scene where basically, you know, Halifax and Chamberlain have this idea like, okay, if he absolutely says on the record that he will never consider peace, then I can resign and it will make sense to people. It won't seem like a play. You can resign, and then we have a quorum, and then they can call a vote of no confidence, kick him out, and then we can come back, basically.
I love it. That scene does a really cool thing. That, like, it's very important story wise, but also because of the way it's all constructed, where the suspense of that scene is he gonna fuck up here, right? Like, is he gonna say the thing that if he says it, then they have everything they need on him, and you know, like you were just saying, they're able to finally defeat him, as it were. So we're not only listening to Gary Oldman as Churchill because he's laying out this plan that's really important and kind of expressing his feelings there, but also we're just waiting for this phrase that I didn't know. You know, does he actually say it in that scene? And so the tension there, I think, is incredible. And it's just a guy talking, and it, like, you know, the only question is he going to say this thing or is he not going to say it? And I really, really liked that moment. It's another one of my favorite parts of the movie.
And it also shows you, right, Churchill's intelligence, right, and his savvy, because they're talking about Dunkirk at this point. They're talking about, you know, there's this other garrison at the beach close to Dunkirk. Again, all this stuff, I did not know any of this stuff, right? And it's like they can distract the Germans, basically give their lives, right? And there in Calais. Yeah, that's what it was.
300 on the other beach in Dunkirk. So they're basically giving themselves up to save those 300,000. Even then, right? He says it to Leighton, where he's like, you know, well, what's the chances? He's like, well, if all of these things go according to plan, we could save maybe 10% of them, which is still more than 8,000. I mean,
exactly.
Imagine having to make those kinds of decisions.
Crazy
right?
decision.
This movie is very, very good at that. You know, we don't need to see 300,000 people to imagine what it would be like if 90% of 300,000 people were just obliterated by the Nazis.
Right. And it's not about them, right? In this point, unfortunately, it's about the person making the decision, not the people the decision affects. Right. But that scene is great because you can feel in the room, right? You can feel from his performance, like you said, this is some serious shit. We're talking about something that's like huge and it's terrible. And this guy won't stop asking about the piece. And you can see him starting to go like, why? I think he says it, right? He goes like, why are you doing this right now? you know? And he realizes, right, that like, he realizes the note taker, he realizes what's going on. He's more where he stops and he kind of takes him out into the hallway, right? Halifax. And, you know, he gets confronted about Gallipoli in this moment. And Oldman is so good in this scene where he's this mix of angry, but also vulnerable and hurt. And like, you can tell he has guilt about what happened. You know, and this whole idea of like, how dare you bring this up right now? Like, you know, and he excuses himself too. So he's also egotistical. He was like, if they were good at with their jobs, everything would have been fine. And I really like how those scenes play out. And I like that it's all one big, huge, long scene, right? It's not broken up into multiple days, into multiple factors. It's just like, we're transitioning from this one room to this hallway. And then that goes right into that scene where he calls Roosevelt on the phone, you know, basically. And you get a whole other side of him that he's like a little kid on the phone with Roosevelt.
Yeah.
You know, he's so meek and so vulnerable and so.
And Roosevelt is so condescending.
I know David Strathairn in I think an uncredited voice role. I think,
very good.
Yeah,
that, little voice part there. Yeah, I before I forget, I've always wanted to see the movie Gallipoli. Peter Weir's film about that, because I know nothing about that. Now I feel like I do, having seen this, and it's mentioned like 3 times in this movie, just in passing. But I've now added that to my list. So, like, I love that. I've always, you know, like when a movie kind of leads you to another movie.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And this movie has spider webs. Like if you haven't seen Dunkirk or Atonement, and in this movie with both its typewriterness, the King's Speech, its typewriterness and its Dunkirk relationship is very much a flip, like a weird flip on Atonement. You know, and I think that's interesting, right? Like you said, like these history movies often will do that, right? They can spider web you into other things you might be interested in and might want to see. There was a scene that I wanted to bring up and I lost it from my head. The scene where he gives his big speech, right, to the people, the radio address to the people.
Oh, this is great. Yeah. I love it. So, I mean, you know, I guess maybe I need to be a little easier on Joe Wright here, because I thought this was really done. The pacing of this was incredible.
Yeah, and again, he's really good. Like you talked about the scene previous where the argument's happening and we have this kind of tension about, is he going to say the wrong thing? That's the big tension, but you feel like very tense about it. And the same thing happens here. He's taking these things that are very banal. If you just shot,
it feels life and death, but he draws it out. You know, it's great. You know, I love when a movie kind of lays out the situation and then breaks the rules, right? Like the red light's going to go on and then you're going to start speaking, and the station manager or whatever like kind of tells him everything that needs to happen, so we as the audience understand. He's going to go live. We're going to go live as soon as the red light comes on. And then in the very foreground of the shot, we see this red light come on. It fills the frame. It lights Gary Oldman's face, and he just kind of sits there for this. It's not that long, but it feels endless, and I love that. You know, it again, and these are not life and death things, but it's like you got to address the people of your country here, and you're just sitting there, you know, stone faced. Really, really great moment. Like they're big decisions, right? But the thing we were talking about before, the idea that, you know, is he going to specifically say, I'm never going to be in favor of peace, right? Like he needs to express that in a certain way or not express that in a certain way. And it feels very life and death just in the moment. You know, it feels the tension is just like almost unbearable in this, you know, it's like, is the guy going to talk or is he not going to talk? That's all it is. But
absolutely.
It's so well done.
It is very well done. And again, it's able to craft these scenes that make them feel almost like, you know, action scenes, but they're just people sitting around. So that is why I think you really get something out of the direction here. I mean, and Oldman, of course, is hitting home runs every single time he's in front of the camera. He's hitting a home run. So it makes your life a lot easier as a director, because even if you're not doing anything great, you got this person sitting there who's just, you know, we talked about this a little bit with the Chalamet speech he gave at the SAG Awards, right? Where he's like, I want to be one of the great ones or whatever, right? Oldman knows what he's got, and he knows what the chance he's got, and he knows the chance he got to give a truly great performance that a lot of people are going to pay attention to, and he's there for the challenge, right? He's up for the challenge. He wants it. He wants to be the center of this movie in every moment and every shot. And
he's not taking huge swings either, right? Like, it is a restrained performance. There are so many close-ups of him in this movie where he's not speaking, and we just see like a little lip twitch or something. Like, I guess that, you know, he studied for a year. They say he studied Churchill's mannerisms and the way he talked and things like that. That had to be a Churchill thing, because I don't feel like that's a Gary Oldman thing. But like this little almost nervous, like you just kind of see this little, you know, facial thing that he does, this little tick almost, and it's very small. It's almost easy to miss. But like, again, in Joe Wright's credit, like, he leaves the camera on him long enough so we just kind of catch that before we move on to something else. I mean, let's talk about this performance a little bit before we go any further. They always say, right? I was thinking about this throughout this entire movie, right? Like, the cliche is that this person disappeared into this character, right? Like, critics use that. It's one of those like very hackneyed sort of critical things, which I was thinking about what that means, like conceptually, right? Like when an actor disappears into a role, like, first of all, you have to be a very well-known actor to be able to do that, no matter
Right.
how good you are.
Yeah.
Like, we have to know you almost like we would know you if we knew you personally, to say that, this person literally became another person.
Right.
Because if it's a very good actor and we've never seen them before, whoever they're playing, they are that person, right?
Yeah.
This was one of the, I think, most extreme examples of, for me, literally an actor disappearing into a role. Like, I did not, and I was, I'm watching this with thinking about Joe Wright, thinking about Gary Oldman, but like, it took me about 30 seconds into this movie. Like, we see him on screen the first time, and it's like, this is Winston Churchill. This is not Gary Oldman. I didn't really think about Gary Oldman much. I thought about Winston Churchill, right? Like, it is literally, he is disappearing into this role. And it's an actor that I like so much. And there were like whole swaths of this movie where I forgot about this actor who I'm a huge fan of and I've liked in so many things. And I've enjoyed the little nuances of his performances and the different kinds of roles he's played. And like, I thought so little about Gary Oldman when I was watching this that when it was over, I was like, holy shit, that was Gary Oldman, right? Like, it almost, afterward thinking back on it, it's like, wow, I almost, not literally forgot, but like in some, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no,
like,
absolutely. No, yeah.
Like, he really became this character in a way that, and a lot of times when you do something like this, it is such a showy role. And it is like, we are going to take those big swings. I do want to do these big moments where, like, I feel like a lot of the actors who go into something like this, knowing that they're, probably going to be a Best Actor nominee, it's like, all right, here's my scene that they're going to show the clip of at the Oscars. And there are scenes like that
Yeah,
here,
for sure. Yes, there's a couple.
But I never felt it when I was watching it, and I think that's a huge credit to Gary Oldman. And he's incredible here.
He's incredible in it, and it's more than an impression. That's something you kind of also gotta kind of fear or expect when you watch a movie about somebody who's so famous, especially somebody who's so famous.
Yes,
for being a public. Persona
you can
that
listen to recorded speeches, right? It's a public feature. It's not Abraham Lincoln where we don't have his voice.
Yeah,
and Daniel Day-Lewis was able to kind of recreate his voice. They say the way he speaks in that movie is the way the actual Lincoln spoke, but none of us were around to hear that. Whereas Churchill, there's hours upon hours of film footage of him and speeches of his. You could just easily, and Oldman said that, right? He said, I didn't want to do an imitation. I wanted to do a creation. I didn't want to do an impersonation. I wanted to do a creation of this character. And, this is now my Winston Churchill, right? Like, when I think of this historical figure, I'm just going to think of Gary Oldman in this incredible makeup and giving this incredible performance.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you said basically everything I would want to say about it, but there's all the nuance and all the stuff that I want from a performance like this. There are the big scenes which draw me in. Like it's a great character for an actor to play, because sometimes you just get a monologue for a couple of minutes. That's part of his core sort of character, is just that he talks for a long time and nobody interrupts him, and he talks about very dramatic, very important things, and so that really helps, but I think also we were saying earlier about the comedy of manner stuff. He's also funny. He is, and that really helps not make the performance feel like it's in this box, right? Of like, this is a prestige performance. Like, you don't get that feeling, right? You get this feeling that there is more going on here. There's life and light in his eyes when he's doing this stuff. And I really, really like that about it.
And he's very like self-deprecating, and we haven't mentioned her much yet either. Kristen Scott Thomas as his wife.
Yes.
Who is
also in Slow Horses, by the way.
I need to watch that show.
Yeah.
I love the character, the way she is. She's supportive. She's incredibly supportive of him, but in a way that I'm not used to, where, there's this great scene with her and their children earlier in the movie. It's like, we knew you were going to be this public figure, and we've been sacrificing our entire lives, and now you're stepping into the role of prime minister. So we've all earned this kind of thing, which is a very, I do feel like they are a loving family, but there is that aspect of it also.
Yeah.
And, she's almost like an advisor as much as she is a spouse. And I really like that about it. It's an interesting character. She's obviously great in this. They had to like kind of old her up, I think, because she's
A little bit.
I mean,
but she's pretty much around that age, though, I think.
Maybe, but she looks older in this, and I think it's,
yes.
I don't think it's actually her
yeah.
looking older. I think they made her up a little bit, but she does. She kind of has this this elderly sort of wisdom gravitas about her that I really like a lot.
I mean, I think, the thing I would say is I agree with you. I think she's great in it, and I think the character has a lot of potential and is interesting. One of my problems with the scripting of the movie is like they introduce a lot of stuff with her about like the sacrifice, even near the end where she's like, this is the face of a woman who's always tired or whatever she says in the mirror. But there's no like payoff or resolution or even like finality, like anything for her character. Like
I guess that's true.
But I feel like, but I think that's the problem with the movie in general, because I feel like where the movie leaves off, I'm like, this is like not. This was like the least interesting speech he gave in the whole movie was the one at Parliament at the end, and he kind of like walks out. He doesn't even have like the last line of the movie. It's one of those things where I feel like that's where the movie kind of fails a little bit for me, where it's like
that mic drop closing shot there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the shot is fine, but it's like it's like the last thing is like that weaponized the English language. That's like the last line, and that feels the most to me like, he picked up the guitar, like kind of part of the movie, and I'm like, it's the last thing I'm left with. You know what I mean?
It's not the scene in the underground.
Oh, no, boy. We'll talk about. See, this is where you and I differ. Okay. I love that scene, and particularly because, like, I should say this. I don't know if it really happened or not. I don't know if that was a thing he did.
It didn't.
Okay, I'm not sure.
So what I read, because I was interested in that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's an interesting creation. It's a good idea. They said Churchill would go out and talk to the public a lot.
Gotcha.
But the this magical train ride that he took never actually happened.
Yeah.
I don't care about the historical accuracy of it.
No.
And we're trying to get at the heart of this character. We're not necessarily trying to chronicle this exactly as it happened, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, I mean, we're almost there. Honestly, we're basically almost there at this point.
We are. Yeah. But that scene bothered me a little bit.
But like you said, the performance, like we talk about, Kristen Scott Thomas is what we were on. Mm-hmm. Like that, like I think that Lily James gets more of like a round cap off of her character than Kristen Scott Thomas's character does, and like things like the Lily James character, where I think Lily James is very winning in this movie. I think like she gets more moments than I expected her to get when the movie started. I was like, oh, this is just going to be like the girl, that's they need a pretty of the time girl to be in this movie with all these old people.
Up with Churchill shit.
Yeah, exactly. And in some ways it is that for a lot of it.
She gets
some
a more
moments.
Interesting character. And they do, the relationship between them really deepens a lot.
Yeah.
I was at like the first 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes of this, it leans pretty heavily into the comedy. It's weirdly lighthearted, considering what it's about. And I was like, wait a minute, did I just mischaracterize? Did I assume this was going to be a different kind of movie than it is? Is this going to be more of a kind of lighthearted portrayal of this very serious thing? But, eventually that does kind of get subsumed by just the gravity of the situation, and I like that about it. I mean, I think again, in Wright's credit, it's very hard to sort of tonally, be in those two places and not make it feel disjointed, and it never does. Like you almost don't notice when this movie goes from being this kind of like comedy of British manners to like, no, this is the most serious thing. Like literally, this is the end of the world.
Yeah.
And it is very subtle, the transition from one to the other. I really liked that a lot.
Yeah. And, you mentioned Lincoln earlier, and I think it actually has a lot in common with that movie in many ways, which is, I think Lincoln is a better overall movie than this is, but they do a similar thing, which is that they're both kind of much more funny than you would expect them to be. And they're much more about like, listen, no matter what era of politics you go to, they're all basically the same like type of people. Like there's the really shitty performative people, and there's like the serious people, and there's like the people who actually want to do the right thing, and they all are forced to sort of, coexist and try to figure it out, together. And I liked that about this. And I think that, again, that lightness is part of what drives the movie. And I think very intentional, I think Wright probably knows this. He's like, I've seen I'm sure he's seen a million of these movies too. And he probably knows like a lot of them don't have any steam. They don't have any gas. They don't have anything. And I'm going to put that into my movie. I'm not going to let the movie just be like, we're very serious and we're going to work in the parliament, and God save the king.
And again, not knowing a lot about Churchill, but like what I knew about him was he is known for his witticisms, his sort of pithy comments,
of course,
his statements, his speeches. So that does feel true to the character also, right? Like to portray him in that very sort of prestige pick kind of way, have the character be that way. I don't think that would have worked here. I think it would have really shown itself. Whereas, this is a little bit truer. And again, true quotes around that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's only so much true you can have in a movie, like in a movie, like that subway scene, that scene where, so basically, I want to go back to the first radio address really quick. The only radio address that he gives in the movie, which I was actually surprised about. I really thought the movie was going to end with some sort of big radio address or something like that, but it doesn't. But what I really like about that scene is like, he gives this speech. It's a great performance by Oldman. It's really dramatic, like we talked about. And then what I love about it is that he's kind of bummed about it afterwards. He's like, I lied to them. Mm-hmm. Like I've never, they like me because I was the only one who ever told them the truth. And now I'm lying to him. And this sets up this next sort of set of scenes where he's sort of like out of sorts, right? France is falling apart. All the U.S. has turned him down. He does the thing where he kind of lies to the people. Things are going really bad, in the Dunkirk thing. The people aren't responding. Operation Dynamo, right? They aren't responding.
I mean, maybe it's one of those shoeshine moments, but they're like, what are we going to call this thing? And he looks over to the fan, the electric fan spinning in the corner of the room, and it's a Dynamo brand fan. And they're like, that's it.
I mean, that feels
at
like...
least they don't say it.
No, right. But it also feels like that maybe that's true because it's so... Otherwise, why would they make it something so dumb? You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Well, this is a thing where it's like, people may don't believe in this. It's part of like that whole sort of vibe, right? So what they're trying to go, but everything's falling apart on him, right? And he just doesn't know like what to do. And we get these scenes where he's kind of like capitulating a little bit about the peace talks and, can't find the right words to say at certain things. And he sort of like, connects himself with the Lily James character a little bit, and that helps him a little bit. But it really is that conversation he has with the king, right? That comes to see him. I mentioned that scene where the light's really harsh and he's sleeping in this room where there's still boxes and everything.
Oh, it's such a good scene.
It's such a good scene. And I love all through the movie, we were seeing both scenes with him and the king and also other people in the king. And you can see the king start to like turn a little bit, right, on the way he feels about it.
Well, there's a nice little character arc there as well, right? Like, so they're basically telling the king, you need to flee to Canada, because the shit's going down here, and we can't have, you can rule from not at home, not on the island. They keep referring to the island, to it as the island, and he just resolutely like, I'm not gonna do that, right? I'm not the king if I'm not here. And a good captain goes down with his ship kind of thing. And I think that's really interesting as well. But that scene between the two of them and the way that turns, like, we don't know really where the king stands on all of this through most of the movie, and then he kind of very nakedly reveals himself in this scene as to how he actually feels about all this. And it's this real stand up and cheer kind of moment. I wasn't expecting it. I didn't know.
Yeah, and me neither. And I thought, like, again, Mendelsohn is great in this scene. Oldman's great in the scene, and they're both so small. Like, no one's going big in this scene, right? It's all very reserved, very pulled back, very like, we're just two people just talking to each other. There's no ceremony. There's no audience for me to perform for. We're just gonna talk. And kind of him saying that I've been alone in all of this, and King saying like, not anymore, right? I'm behind you.
This bromance like really got to my heart, and it's really tugged the heartstrings.
Choose what you're gonna choose, but and I like what he says about like, and again, I will say this is outside the real world like demeanors of either of these men, because they're both extremely powerful. Like, I'm sure they made some shitty decisions, did a lot of shitty stuff in their lives. But in the reality of this movie, the deal, like, he says, like, the thing that I've realized is that, like, the people are tough. Like, they don't, they have to go through a lot fucking more than we have to go through. Yeah. Like, so, like, don't pretend that, like, you have to protect them like they're a little baby bird, basically, and they want you to be honest with them. That's what they want. They might scream about it, but they want you to be honest with them, and that leads kind of really to the scene you don't like, which is when he goes into the underground, right? And I think as an amalgamation of something that Churchill actually did, right, which was to talk to people and get a sense of what people actually were thinking and wanted, right? This is obviously a very movie-fied version of it, where it's like there's a bunch of people on the train who all want to talk to him and all are going to say the things that kind of he needs to hear, right?
And all support him beyond any possible, there's no doubt there whatsoever. The little kids and the old people and everyone just, I'm surprised he didn't just get like 50 hugs in this scene.
Well, it would have been fine. But this is another comedy of manners scene, right? I love him like trying to figure out what train he's going to go on. It's a nice little break for me from, we've been in super serious territory for a long time by the time we get to this scene.
The reactions, I like the beginning part of the scene where he just kind of gets on the subway car and everybody's like, holy shit, that's the prime minister. But nobody says it. Everybody's trying to be like very cool about it. But you can tell it.
And I will say part of some of this stuff, and the reason that I probably responded very well to it, right, is that, and you can tell me if this sounds crazy, but for some reason right now, a bunch of people being anti-fascist and being very open about it. So for some reason, I enjoy, okay? And what I like in this is that, when he talked, he's very, very magnanimous with all the people for the most part, right? I love that little thing with the baby. Like, that shit gets me all the time. Like, I think that was really funny. Like, all babies look like me, I think was a really funny line.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, you got jokes, Winston. Go to your set at the Comedy Store or whatever. But and one thing I like through the whole performance, right, is, he'll be funny, he'll be loud, he'll be whatever. But when he talks about the enemy, there's this like true vitriol and hatred and just like you could feel like it's against every fiber of his being, right? Is what they're doing. And I think that comes across really nicely in the scene. And, this whole idea of like, there's not a great chance, but there's always some sort of hope. Right? As long as we're still here and we're still fighting, right? I like to see that not in just these rooms with these politicians, right? I like to see it out or just with the one girl he has a human connection to, So that's why I like the scene. Now, yes, it's very like movie, right? It's very like, not only are we going to talk to people, but we're going to talk to people on a train in one location where everyone is just around me talking to me, right?
This an amazing representation of diversity, every possible demographic.
Yeah.
There is, multiple
I feel like he would have been, I feel like he would have more of a reaction to the one black guy. Yeah. Like, what are you doing here? I mean, again, I don't know English racial politics of the
I don't either.
40s. So
what I have heard about Churchill is not particularly favorable.
I'm sure not.
So there's a little bit of a can we call it whitewashing of his racial behavior, his racial attitudes in the scene, and it's just so blatant. I don't know, but like, that was just one of many things that bothered me about the scene. This just feels like a fantasy to me. Whereas
it is sort of a fantasy.
A lot of the rest of the movie feels very grounded and very down to earth, and I don't know, this took me a little bit out of it. It's not a bad scene. I mean, it's beautifully shot. They have this they acquired an actual vintage tube car.
Such a nice train car, dude.
Yeah.
Look at the seats in that thing.
Yep. Yeah, and everybody's very well dressed and everything.
Yeah, well, it's a time period. People wore a lot nicer.
Have to mention, I'm sorry, we'll come back to this. There's this moment early in this film, you mentioned it, when he goes to France. So he's on this military transport plane, this like grungy looking, like beat up ass, like transport plane. And like everybody on it is obviously in uniform and they've all been fighting for a while. And here's Winston Churchill in this perfect suit, drinking out of a cut crystal glass whiskey or whatever he drinks there.
Yeah.
Just kind of sitting there looking like this, like aristocrat in the middle of, this ground level war thing. Yeah. And I was like, that's a masculinity that I like.
Yeah,
that's a thing that you'd never see ever again. Pete Hegseth is not going to do that.
No.
He'll drink. He will.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, he'll booze it up on that plane, but not out of the fancy glass and dressed up like that.
No.
I really, really like that a lot.
Well, he also has that wall of hats. Winston Churchill, not Pete Hegseth, has the wall of hats.
Well, he probably has a wall of hats too.
But they're like, something else. But yeah, there's like wall of gorgeous hats. A
lot of camo.
And he does start out, the train scene obviously doesn't come out of nowhere, right? Because we do have that scene earlier where he's literally talking about, he's like, I've never rode the underground before, so they are kind of seeding it. right? Earlier on in the movie. Not that makes the scene work completely, but I'm just saying, like,
well, we do get it's set up by, and I liked the
oh,
way
guy
this
was so
looks.
good too. His like assistant guy too.
And so he takes these car rides
Yeah.
earlier in the movie, and we get these beautiful dolly shots. I mean, it looks like a perfume commercial because it's a Joe Wright movie.
Yeah, of course.
But we are slowly, and it is in slow motion also, so we're slowly dollying left to right as he's in the car, and we just see, British citizens going about their business, pushing their baby, and, talking on a street corner and buying stuff and walking around and going to work and stuff like that. And I believe we see that twice, and then that kind of leads us to this, so the thought of Churchill talking to the regular folks is established.
Yes.
And we see him because Gary Oldman is so good at acting in these silent scenes. We kind of see him there. Like, we do get the reverse shot. We're seeing, the world in some sense from his perspective. And then we see him kind of reacting to it like, right, this is what I'm fighting for, right? Like, these are my people that are going to be affected by whatever decision that I make. So it's completely out of nowhere, but it feels incongruous with the rest of the movie, just in the way it plays out, I think.
Right. Yeah, I get what you're saying. I want to bring up though I guess it's Samuel West plays like his like right hand guy, kind of legendary British theater film actor guy.
Recognizable face, but yeah,
very
not
recognizable face.
A name that you would. Yeah.
No, but I just love him. He fills a role that I just love in certain movies where he's just like, doesn't really have an arc or anything like that, but he's just like a good presence and a good face to have there. Like he kind of gets Churchill. So whenever Churchill makes like a joke or whatever, he's always like, he's got like kind of like a wry smile about him or whatever, but he's also got like, I just like their whole dynamic.
Just like quiet exasperation at stuff that Churchill does. Yeah, I like that a lot.
I like it a lot. So I want to say I think he's really good in this as well.
Where's Tom Hollander though?
Come on, I don't know. Perfect movie for Tom Hollander.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There must have been a falling out there. There must have been a Joe Wright, Tom Hollander, because he should have been in Pan too.
He should have been in Pan. I mean, who knows? We still got 2 more movies. He might be in either one of those movies.
Hope he comes back. I hope he's okay. Now I'm worried about Tom Hollander. I'm going to look it up.
Oh, he's fine.
If he's done anything.
I mean, yeah, he's fine.
Well, because why else?
He was just in The White Lotus season 2. No, he wasn't in season 3, but he was in season 2 a couple years ago.
I don't watch The White Lotus, but good.
He's quite good. He's quite good.
Weirdly, all of my favorite actors are on that show, so I should just suck it up.
You should just watch it.
Not a big Mike White guy, though.
I mean, what's your experience with Mike White for you not to be a Mike White guy?
Chuck and Buck.
Just Chuck and Buck from like 25 years ago.
That's what launched him. Yeah,
I know that's what launched him, but he's done a lot of stuff.
Written a lot of like comedies that I didn't particularly like. I don't know. I'm just.
Oh man. He wrote School of Rock.
Okay movie.
It's a fucking great movie, dude. But anyway, so we're basically at the end here, right? Then he basically, goes to Parliament now and says, we're not doing peace. Basically, we're going to fight to the last man. And the last kind of domino fall is like Chamberlain sort of with this handkerchief thing. At the beginning of the movie, they were like, if Chamberlain pats his head with a handkerchief, we support him. If he doesn't, then we stay quiet.
It's very conclave.
Yes, it's very conclave. He doesn't do it at the beginning, but he does it at the end. Everyone like erupts or whatever, and he gets all full support of all of Parliament.
I know he was not the first choice. This was supposed to be John Hurt, but this actor, Ronald Pickup,
yeah.
Thought he was great.
He was really he was great in it.
Got a perfect look for it and has the perfect little mustache and
yes.
The way that character carries himself is not knowing a lot about Neville Chamberlain, but sort of understanding how they're trying to portray the character. I thought he did it pretty perfectly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's very much a John Hurt type guy for sure. And I would have been interested to see John Hurt's take on it because
love John Hurt,
but also John Hurt you often. Much more powerful feeling, right, than Pickup is, and I feel like it might have clashed with the character a little bit. Not that Hurt's not a great actor who can do many things, but his sort of like default elder statesman role is many times to be very sure of himself, and I am, authoritative British older man.
And this character is not. We learn pretty early on that he's dying, and this is going to be kind of the last thing that he does is how he behaves in this situation is what he's going to be remembered for.
Yes.
And we know how that all played out.
Yeah. So the movie kind of just ends. And that's kind of like the thing that I don't like about it, where it's like, we're building. And we have the speech, which is good. Like he gives a good speech and he's a great performance, obviously, like we've said throughout the whole movie, but it just feels like we've like the scene before this is like the big scene. where he kind of in the room with them is sort of like, this is what I'm doing, and then that scene where he's with the outer cabinet is, I think, even more stirring
that scene is great. Yeah.
than the scene, this scene where he's talking in front of Parliament, and I could have used a little bit more of a pop at the end, whether it be another radio address or something.
The handkerchief wasn't enough for you.
It wasn't enough for me. I was uninvested in Neville Chamberlain's handkerchief. So
I wasn't either, but it was a nice callback to earlier in the movie. So
yes,
I did like it. And I like the way I mentioned before, that kind of mic drop shot where he walks out the door and then we cut to black there. I liked that, although, this here's what had the epilogue text at the end of this.
Yeah, that's just classic.
You knew they were going to do it, but I felt like we could have dramatized that. It wouldn't have hurt the pacing of the movie if there had been one more scene. I agree.
Yes, and it's also one of these things where, again, I know they feel like they have to do stuff like that at the end of these type of movies, but it's like, yeah, we know.
Well, not everybody knows, but it was...
Yeah.
We've seen Dunkirk.
Not even that part. Not even that.
Just recaps the ending of Dunkirk.
Yeah. It basically was. It basically like, oh, Mark Rylance is going to show up with his boat and save some people. But I bet you didn't know that the time was all wonky. These weren't happening at the same time. Spoilers for Dunkirk, I guess. But
what a great movie that is.
It's a great movie.
That's another one that I want to see now. Again, having seen this.
That and this, I think, fit into that very like dad core cinema type of thing, which is just like history boner.
Before we recorded tonight, I was like, here's two 40-something dads talking about this prestige Winston Churchill movie. Like, I don't know.
And both going, I want to know a little bit more about this Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
This is the biggest dad thing possible.
Maybe I'm going to skip Gallipoli and watch like Sid and Nancy when I'm done. And we'll talk about that next episode. And then I'll feel cool again.
Maybe. Who made Sid and Nancy? Do we know? Do you know?
Alex Cox.
Okay.
Repo Man, Alex Cox.
Yeah. All right. That's Darkest Hour. I think our thoughts are pretty clear about it. I would say, like, for me, it's really sort of like this structural stuff and some of the smaller characters not really having like arcs, even though they're given the beginnings of arcs. Like, that's the thing. If you don't have an arc at all, fine. If you're like, Winston Churchill's right-hand man and you're just there to be a presence, cool, fine. I'm like fine with it. Like, you don't need an arc. But like some of these people, they give little like starts to arcs to, and then they're like, well, we don't have room for this anymore. We got to just move on. And I would rather like those arcs not be started, right? Than even like.
Well, it's possible there was a longer cut of this.
I'm sure there was.
I don't know if it exists, but maybe it just didn't work, and they trimmed it down. It's still pretty long. It's still like 2 hours 5. So.
2 hours 5, which is like, that's a movie
for something like this. Yeah, that's not excessively long.
Exactly.
It is,
if you had told me that Winston Churchill biopic was 3.5 hours long, I would have believed you. You know what I mean? Like. Because that's the kind of shit that really, like, they do a lot, and or they used to do a lot. They don't really do it anymore. But that, I can't stand a 2 hour and 5 minute long.
Yeah, that's a good Joe Wright length, right? Like,
yeah, that's like most
does.
of his movies. Yeah. Pan is 10 minutes longer than this, and boy. Oh, Pan's 10 minutes shorter than this? What is it?
10 minutes shorter.
Shorter than this, right?
I think it's like an hour 50.
It probably would have been 2 hours and 45 minutes if they let the Joe Wright cut, release the Joe Wright cut. And so we're getting close to the end of Joe.
Public is really clamoring for that.
Yeah, they're really clamoring for the Joe Wright one.
Tell you what though, if they re-released Pan right now and it was a half hour longer and they just like told people it was a new movie, people like, yeah, cool, new Peter Pan movie, they'd still hate it. But
yes, they would hate it, but they wouldn't remember it existed.
That's what I'm saying. Like it could be, you could just re-release it. It would be like the first release.
Yeah, Hugh Jackman pretty much looks the same, so it'd be totally fine. It's funny, as we're recording this, it'll be long gone by the time this is on. But they're about to re-release Pride and Prejudice in the movie theaters for the 20th anniversary, and I'm considering going to see it when it hits the theaters. But I was talking to Ghost of the Podcast, Brian Verderosa, and he was like, when I saw, what did he say? He saw that new Jason Statham movie, Working Man or whatever the hell it's called. I don't remember. Working Man. And he's like, before I saw a trailer for the 20th anniversary release of Pride and Prejudice. Do you think that's weird? And I was like, do I think it's weird that you saw a trailer for it or that they're releasing it? And he goes, that they're re-releasing it. And I told him, I was like, it's one of those movies you don't realize is secretly incredibly popular with a whole huge generation of people. It's one of the movies that has stuck around for a long time. You don't just re-release any movie in the for a 20th anniversary in the movie theater. much like another movie we covered, like Jennifer's Body, like we covered, like a movie that, you know, I think has a big following that people just don't, and it happens a lot of time with movies directed more towards a female audience. A lot of times, you know, because it's so focused not on that audience, we're talking about like popular movies and how people see movies, that people don't tend to realize sometimes that these movies just grow and grow and grow. People watch them over and over and over and over again. And so they have a huge possibility of business, because the studio is no way they're not looking at numbers. They're not going like,
sure, look
at the disc sales, look at the on-demand sales, look how much it's watched on whatever, you know, streaming service is on in Britain or whatever, because it's not on a streaming service here. And like what's, you know, that's why they do it. But it's just funny
You've just got me thinking about a re-release of Jennifer's Body now. Like, how do we make that happen?
That would be great. It's just
20 years.
It's 2000. No, a couple years, right? Two more years. Was it 2007? That movie?
9?
2009. Was it 9?
Maybe 9.
Yeah. But it's just funny that we're doing a series about Joe Wright and they're releasing his first movie in the movie theater. It's just a crazy confluence of things that are happening right now. So we got 2 left. I guess technically Woman in the Window is the first of the 2, and then Cyrano is the last one. I think that's probably good, because we probably want to leave on something that at least feels like a Joe Wright movie, you know? And I think, look, right now we're doing this. We haven't watched Woman in the Window yet, right? I think if we watch Woman in the Window and you and I both agree, like, we can't do a whole episode about this movie, you know, because it's whatever, because it's nothing, you know, not even because it's bad, right? Then maybe we'll just tack it on to the Cyrano episode when we do that.
Wow, so you're going into that with very low expectations.
I'm going to just being nothing. Like, not that it's, if it was terrible, we could do it. We've proven we can do episodes on terrible movies, you know. But if a movie's nothing, that's when we're going to run into this situation where I feel like we'll get half an hour in and be like, well, what are we gonna do? You know, like that's what.
Well, I'm not sure about that. Like,
well, I'm saying we're gonna watch the movie
now that we know what Joe Wright is capable of. If it is nothing, I feel like that's an interesting conversation too, because clearly, if it is that, then he's not being himself at all. You know, and we can talk about the lack of Joe Wright.
Absolutely,
in that movie.
I'm saying we're gonna watch the movie and then we'll decide. We'll make the call. I'm just saying, like, I just don't want
the only ones to ever probably talk about it. So
definitely. Probably into a microphone.
And we will, well, unfortunately, it's so much, there's that horror movie out now called The Woman in the Yard. So some horror fans will be like, oh, that's that movie that they're talking about. And
let's get them in here.
Very disappointed when they hear what we're actually talking about.
I mean, if they love, you know, mystery fiction, they might tune in, because it was a book first. I think that people liked.
People read that on planes, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely an airplane book for sure. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, we got that, and then we got Cyrano to close it out, and then we will be moving over to Peter Jackson. So I hope you've been enjoying this series. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on your podcast platform of choice. You can check out everything we do over at intrepidfilmographers.com. That's goes right to our Substack. And yeah, I really appreciate the support so far. This has been a fun series. It's been our longest series. It's been great to try it out, especially a filmmaker that we didn't really know the second half of their filmography at all, which I think there's not going to be a lot that we sort of like dive into. We're really kind of blind on a whole half of their filmography. So that's been interesting and cool. And it's been fun for me so far to be able to, I feel like I know him as a director now, much like we did with Kaczynski, right? Where I'm like, I see all your little tricks that you do. And I feel the same way about Joe Wright. I can't believe that many people know more about Joe Wright's filmography than we do, Nick, at this point. So
we are the Joe Wright experts. Yeah.
We'd be like, Joe, when you were doing that we're the foremost experts on the film Spiderhead and on Joe Wright's filmography. Yeah. So we're carving out a little niche of movies nobody cares about.
Pan too.
Oh yeah, Pan probably. Yeah,
but if there is ever going to be a conversation about Pan, we will be included in that conversation. Unfortunately, there never will be a conversation.
It's true.
About Pan.
No. Well, you know, you never know though, man. Movies get reclaimed all the time, and people are gonna be like, you know what? I watched Pan when I was 12, and I think it's good actually. And
some film student will write their master's thesis on it, and will be cited in there.
Yeah, get ready, Nick, because they're gonna your class is gonna be full of them soon. The Pan heads. Yeah. They're all going to be in there singing Smells Like Team Spirit. They're going to be like, you know this song that came from the movie Pan?
Yes, exactly. They'll come in their Nirvana t-shirts that they bought at Target.
Yeah.
And be like, oh, I like that song in that movie.
Yeah. Oh, what did I ask you in the text message there? Oh, did the Nazis sing "Come as You Are" in this movie? All right, yeah. So that's gonna.
I was gonna say it's actually Blitzkrieg Bop again because it would be more appropriate here than it was there.
Hey ho, let's go. So anyway, that's it for the podcast for this week. Until next time, thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Bobby.
And thank you to everybody who's been listening. Be good to what? Whoa, those are not the right words. Be good to one another. Later.